Good evening.
Hi, Steve.
How do, Tom? Are you in Manchester or up north?
Oh, that's the reason I couldn't be at the meeting on
I
Monday
can't
is
quite hear
because
you.
I was up north and I don't have any coverage at all. Oh, hold on.
I hear a little tiny voice. I can't really make it out.
That's not me. Let me mute myself.
Can you hear me? No? Yes?
How's that? Any better? Is that better?
Huh. Maybe try turning up the volume or going to the bottom left and hit the little arrow by mute and hit test speaker and microphone. Because it would be a shame not to be able to hear you. Testing 1, 2.
How's that?
Perfect.
All right.
Whatever you did,
Yeah.
it was good.
I must have turned the volume, the speaker down for something that I was listening to that wasn't that interesting.
That's what it is. Well, thank you. I appreciate your optimism about us. Are you up north or in Manchester?
Oh no, I'm in Manchester.
Good.
Yeah, I've got no electronic signal. I don't even have can't get texts or any
Okay.
email or anything up there. So
Off the grid, as they say, huh?
yeah, that's about it.
Hi, Jess.
Hi there, how are you guys?
Hi, Jess.
Good. The MBTA is going past. The building is shaking.
I'm trapped in my isolation room. COVID finally got me after 3 years of avoiding it.
Oh, Do you know where you got it?
The only thing I can think and it is that Chris had, he's working at Triton schools and he had a cough and cold all last week. He tested negative 3 separate times, but I was nowhere else last week. I don't go anywhere unmasked, so nothing
Yeah.
else makes sense except that I have the same symptoms. So it's just very weird that he never tested positive.
It's an elusive little bugger, isn't it? But
Yep.
how are you feeling?
I feel fine. Just a little bit of congestion. Yeah, no big deal. Just annoying.
So no need to pull out the ivermectin or Paxlovid or,
Nope, not doing any, just some Tylenol. That's been it.
okay, good. Look at Sue Croft with a halo.
Yeah, you do have a halo, Sue.
We're
It's
not
the
worthy.
It's the poor lighting in my room that I'm sitting in. There's a ceiling light that's terrible.
Yeah, that's what they always say.
Here, I'll try to move so the halo goes away.
The halo's nice. It's a good
It was
effect.
nice.
It looks good on you.
Yeah, I'm thinking of getting one. It seems to smooth out all the wrinkles and whatnot. Not that you have any, but if you did, you wouldn't be able to see them.
Oh, okay.
That was a good catch by Steve, huh?
Oh, my goodness.
It
Oh,
sounded like
it's
something funny to say until I said it.
Wednesday night, yeah. What was the joke in my family was always, oh, your cold sore looks so much better. No.
So Steve, I just got your email 2 minutes ago before I
problem.
joined this meeting about the money that's left. So I am unprepared for talking about that, but I don't think much has changed since the last
good.
email that I sent you.
I'll just
About
pull
that.
that up.
I did, there was one invoice since
Mhm, from Scott.
for Scott, and
Yep.
that was like a little over $4,000.
I remember it well. Yes, so we had just under $40,000. We owe Dana 7 and Scott about 4 a month.
Yep.
Although that's going to go down when he submits his final report. Okay, so we got a little bit of wiggle room and maybe carry over.
Yep.
That's if we don't have that big party in Sarasota, Florida.
Whoops.
Would be for a research trip, correct?
Yes, we have to study how they change their water rates.
Okay.
I'm sure Florida will be a wonderful example of how to do things.
They do have more evaporation down there than we do.
That's true.
And they have those
And
big,
alligators,
those things, yeah.
Alligators.
boa constrictors too.
All those things we don't want to have.
Yes, well, global warming, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We're getting proposals when there's landscaping, large scale landscaping being done. Concom is getting proposals that are now routinely using mid-Atlantic and even southern species of trees like redbud, which has always been kind of a chancy plant for our climate, but they think it's going to thrive over the next 30, 50 years. Not so good for lobsters, though.
Mm.
Well, I've had a red bud for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
So they last. Yeah, I think my sister did too. And what did I see at Jack Burke's? Dawn Redwoods. Those are something. Well, folks, it's 7 o'clock according to the bell in the church in town. So let me call to order this February 15th, 2023 meeting of the Water Resource Protection Task Force under the auspices of the Select Board. And I perceive that a quorum is present. So we will begin with our agenda, which I'm going to share briefly here. Any announcements from anybody before we plunge in? Okay, I'm going to ask the kind of chair's prerogative here that we rearrange slightly the agenda. We'll cover everything. There's a lot to cover. But I thought that one or two things will be good raw material for some of the subsequent discussions. And I don't think most of you have not seen the stuff I'm talking about. So I'd like to begin with this model of potential changes to our water rates, because it's got some real interesting implications. So let me see if I can find that here. Okay, can you see the title page, Modeling Manchester's Water Rates?
Yes.
Okay. So just so everybody's on the same page, today we have a relatively complicated system, but with prices that don't change very much. So we have 6 tiers, or what they're called blocks, most places, of water rates, which go from 6.6 cents per cubic foot to 9.23 cents per cubic foot. I realize I have only 5 there, but there is a 6th, trust me. I turned those into cents per gallon, and they range from 0.9 cents per gallon to 1.23 cents per gallon. So you can see there's a percentage change, but it's pretty small. And we've observed this before. Another thing to keep in mind is that residential users, us, which are about over 95% of the consumption in the system, use around 140, 150 million gallons a year, depending on the. So at a penny a gallon, ta-da, $1.5 million of residential revenue, give or take. And these are rough numbers, but Chuck, you can kick me under the digital table here if I get anything really off. So the big question that we wanted to try to address by modeling is, what's the risk that we'll start losing system revenues if we get conservation to work, particularly if we get the largest users to conserve? And that's a problem because there's not a lot of variable cost in our system. It's all variable revenue, but it's very fixed cost. It costs about the same to pump the first gallon as the last gallon, roughly. So if we got, for instance, tiers 5 and 6 to cut 50% of their usage out, that would take out about 15 million gallons, or about 200,000 out of the 1.5 million. You could get twice that if they cut all of their usage just in that tier. So they would basically, those 200 roughly households would simply be finding ways to drop down to more typical usage. They'd still be on the high side, but not dramatic. And that would really cut into revenue, 360,000. And then a more robust kind of 5 or 10 year goal would be to have everybody conserve 20%, flushing less, buying better appliances and faucets and whatnot. And tiers 5 and 6 cut a lot, and that would take out over $400,000. So these are problematic numbers. And just as a reference point, I think our system pumped about 25 million fewer gallons this summer compared to the preceding 4 years. So that's a combination of lower losses unaccounted for water, plus voluntary conservation, because we put conservation in place, what, in July, I think. However, system revenues don't track that quite exactly. So there's some mystery in that about how much voluntary conservation we actually got, but clearly there was some, and it may have been substantial. Gordon, your hand is up.
Thanks, Steve. So what do you mean by cutting 100% of that usage in the second bullet point there? Does that mean they just don't fall into tier 5 and 6 anymore?
Yep,
And they're
they
now
cut
at tier
down,
4?
exactly. They cut down their usage enough so that they don't intrude into 5 or 6.
Okay.
And that, of course, is where the really hefty usage occurs in
Yep.
one or 2 quarters a year in the summertime.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. So we have a model now that uses all 5 years of account level data by quarter, and it can predict what happens when you change the rates or the blocks, the tiers. And so far, we've tried 3 different scenarios on it. In each case, and John Round really gets the credit for the original design here. He said 6 tiers is too many. You know, people can't really respond to it. 3 or 4 tiers makes a lot more sense. So all 3 of these scenarios use only 4 blocks of rates, tiers of rates. The first one keeps tier 1 the same and then shoots up to 17.5 cents a gallon for really hefty use in the 4th tier. The second one, just to be dramatically different, says your water is free if you stay below 65 gallons per capita per day, which is about 14,000 gallons a quarter for a 2.5 person household. Now, I know we can't, we don't know how many people are in each household, and we probably shouldn't. So this is just an experimental one. And then it rises rapidly to about half the level of the first one, 8.8 cents per gallon. And the third one is kind of in between. It cuts the price to half, 3 cents per cubic foot if you're below 65 gallons per capita per day, and then it rises moderately fast. So we have 3 different scenarios that look like this. This is the cents per gallon, and this is the gallons per quarter. So our existing one is black, and it kind of inches up from 6 cents to 9 cents per gallon or something, and then stays there. All the other alternatives are steeper steps, much more progressive. Alternative 1 being the most progressive, up to almost 18 cents. Alternative 2 follows it, but caps out at whatever that is, 8.8 cents. Alternative 3 follows it and stops at 6.1 cents. And there's a little bit discrepancy down here. So what's the impact? Very interesting finding. Look at the blue ones first. This is today. So today we have about $1.5 million of system revenues. Alternative 1 would jump to 6.5 million with no conservation. Alternative 2, 4.8. Alternative 3, 4.5. So very substantial increases. And as you can imagine, that's fueled by much, much higher annual bills for a relatively small fraction, 10% of the users. The green bars show what happens if in those 3 conservation scenarios. And the point I want to take away from this is that under all 3 conservation scenarios, there's no deterioration in revenue. There's in fact an increase. And the reason for that is that these structures have significant impact on the top 10 users, also pretty noticeable impact on the top 100. They also affect the next 200 or 300. And we're led to believe by a lot of anecdotal evidence and a few academic studies that people's behavior doesn't change very much when you raise their water rates, even if it's a dramatic increase, as we've seen in Wenham doubled their top rates just ago, for instance. So I'm just going to stop here. There's a lot more output from this about average bills and such, which I can show you. But the reason I'm showing you this is that one of the things that could happen if we make recommendations about these kinds of block rate changes, and if the select board adopts them and phases them in, let's say over a couple, 3 years, is that the system will have considerably more revenue. And I just want you to keep that in mind, because a lot of the things we're talking about will also increase the cost of the system, at least temporarily. Questions, comments?
Steve, I think when we talked, this is Chuck, I think you gave me some numbers on kind of what you would expect say the top 10 users or the top whatever percentage, what the difference in their annual bill was. And I guess I'm wondering if you would, just for the sake of the group, they could know, I guess, kind of where that falls in line with those 3 scenarios.
Okay, well, first of all, I trust that none of us are among the top 10 users. Although if you are, we forgive you. But whether or not you are, strap in, tighten your seatbelt. So this is what happens to the bottom 1,500 users. Here we go. Impact on the 1,500 smallest users is scenarios. Their bills would either be the same, about $370 a year, be cut in half, or go to zero, and we might have a flat rate meter charge or something. 350 who use about twice as much, 100 gallons per capita per day. Their bills today are 84. Essentially, they wouldn't change. Alternative 2 would drop them, but the others would leave them about $800. The next 150, which is another tripling, 300 gallons per person per day, roughly 275,000 per year. Today, they pay $2,700, and they would see significant increases to 4,000 or 6,400 or 7,300. And the top 10 users who today pay about $14,000 would see that go up tenfold under alternative 1, or about 5 times and 6 times under 2 and 3. And these are numbers which I suspect would get anybody's attention, particularly because they're getting up probably toward the level of their property tax. And it is something they can do something about. And even if a private well is $75,000 to drill and get certified and maybe filter to get the minerals out of, it would have a short payback against those kinds of rates. Was that what you had in mind, Chuck?
Yeah, I just thought it was good context for the group, but yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
So, I mean, you can easily imagine how unpopular with a very small segment these, how unpopular with another 150 households these kinds of rates could be. So obviously, to make this work, we need to be presenting a problem of sufficient importance to solve that we have a reason to do this sort of stuff. You don't just raise the prices because we'd like to have more revenues in the system and do more work. And we also ought to have some conservation carrots, so to speak. Danvers, for example, as Chuck pointed out, has a program called WUMP, is that right? I think it's WUMP.
Yes.
Yes, which gives you between 50 and $300 every time you install something that makes your water use more efficient, like a low use washing machine or dishwasher, or a low flow faucet, or sensors in an irrigation system. So those kinds of things are possible. Yes, Jeff.
I just wanted to jump the gun a little bit and say, we've done a great job of coming up with this model and these numbers, and it gives us a really good feel for things. But we're not like going ahead with this without a consultation from a professional ref tell us. That's where I'm jumping the gun.
Yep, do it.
They're gonna check on us here. We're not. We need confirmation of anything reasonably close to this.
Yeah, we also need the voice of experience from somebody who's worked with dozens, maybe hundreds of towns and cities on this same issue, to say, how often have you actually seen a negative impact on the total revenues in the system? It sounds like it's quite uncommon, but nobody short of specialists really knows. Jess?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and I have no idea how this factors into this, but I know myself, and I have 2 friends who are massage therapists who work out of their homes. I have my gym in my home. It's hard when you're figuring out this per capita usage, because I know, like, my friends who are massage therapists, obviously they have to wash all the sheets and all that, and so they are certainly doing a larger than normal per capita, but it's partly a business use out of the homes. I don't know, is there any way to sort of, I guess, factor things like that in that could be accounting for higher use? And then if you are sort of running a business out of your home, I guess just, I don't know if there's any way to.
That sounds very familiar, folks.
Yeah. I don't
I
know
don't
the
even really
answer to
know what
that.
my question is, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that.
Well, it falls in a category of important questions like multi-unit housing. much of which is on a single meter right now. So they're getting the penalty of higher tiers. Although that's lots of typically multiple units dividing up that water usage and nobody using it heavily. I don't know. I mean, I just eyeballing the people who are in the top 200, maybe being a massage therapist would get you there, but I doubt it would.
I was off camera.
John or Gordon, did you have a?
Yeah, I did have another question, Steve. Is there anything in the Massachusetts state laws that restricts how much a town can increase their water bills, or is it totally up to the voters to decide that?
Not aware of it. It's actually up to the so-called water and sewer commissioners, which in our case is the select board.
Okay.
But I don't know, does any Scott or anybody else know if these decisions are subject to review at the state level?
Steve, I'll just mention, sorry for joining late, but my understanding is the only restriction is that you can't make a profit. So if your revenues are consistently higher than your costs, then you're charging too much. But I just came off of a water commissioners meeting, and we just created a second stabilization fund for future likely expenditures like PFAS treatment. Sound familiar? So I would say my knowledge base is as long as you don't, you can increase the water rates as much as you want, as long as you don't create a profit.
So as long as you're putting it back into the system, then okay.
And my sense also is that many water systems are underfunded given likely future costs. So I think there's a lot of room for increases.
Yep. John?
Yeah, so a couple of things to that point. If you raise the rates too much, I know there was a town in California where some very large users sued the system because they were charged what they felt were exorbitant rates. And they were successful because what they were being charged was not equal to the value that they received, because in effect, the value they received for the water they got was similar to the value per unit that other people in town received. So there was some precedent along those lines. And with regard to, I guess, what is it, scenario one, where, I mean, we're dealing with tens of thousands of dollars of increase. It's a very small number of people that are involved in that. I mean, we've got what, 2,200, I guess, water customers, and we're talking about 10 or 15 people. And if they reduce their usage only by, say, 10 or 15 or 20%, they're out of the top tier entirely. And as this graphic shows, 1450 plus 350, what is that? 1,800 users really don't see any change in their water bill at all. And that's 1,800 out of 2,100. That's almost 90% of the folks would see no change in really these scenarios, unless you go to the
conceivably could see a reduction.
Yeah, and conceivably see a reduction, which I have a little concern about, because now you're starting to threaten the break-even number here. But this escalation really affects very, very few people, and by just not a major correction, they can bring their numbers down quite a bit. We obviously need to do a little market research with some of this, but we're curious what our consultant will say before any of this happens.
So I've had only a brief interaction with Dave Fox, the principal at Raftellus. We're due to talk on Friday. I hope you can join that, John. But one thing he did offer, no, hold that. That's not relevant right now. Anyway, yes, there's a lot to be. Oh, yeah. He was talking about how you phase. If you're going to make a dramatic change, you don't just drop it like a heavy shoe on people. You phase it in. And clearly, he said, clearly you would move first to make the changes that are likely to increase revenue, meaning at the top tiers. And then if those produce what you expect, then you can play with reductions in the lower tiers. So you don't expose yourself to the risk of hurting system revenues, which all makes sense, which is why I'm very eager to talk to him about lots of other tips like that. One reason that this is all particularly pertinent is that several of us had interviewed Chuck Dam again, and Chuck, you may want to correct what I'm saying, but I'd summarize one of the key points was that there is a considerable amount of risk at proceeding at the relatively slow pace of replacing ancient water mains that we're currently doing. I mean, what we're doing is much better than what we've been doing for perhaps the last 5 or longer decades. So in a sense, for many, many years, generations, it looks like, Manchester's kind of been borrowing the money that we could have been spending on standard replacement cycles of things like unlined cast iron pipes. And now, now we have to pay it back. So when you talk about the unit cost of water, the distribution system is fragile, and Chuck and Nate and their people spend a fair amount of time, keeping it running. It's kind of duct tape and airplane glue in some cases, and replacing as quickly as they could. So if we could find a way to fund accelerated replacement, that would be a good thing. Going to the town and saying, let's double the capital budget for a water main replacement, that's a non-starter, I believe. But saying the enterprise fund can now sustain another $1 million of annual replacement efforts, that might well be attractive to the select board and everybody else. John, are your hand still up? Okay,
There you
so
go.
let's go back to the program here. Thanks for letting me flip that around. So Scott, you told me before you only have a brief update, but go ahead. Tell us what.
Yeah, very brief. I mean, I am working on finalizing my report, and I had intended to have it done for this meeting, but I did have some minor surgery that set me back a week of recovery as my excuse. So I will get back to you certainly for the next meeting to finalize that report on water budget and safe yield numbers and the final proposed protection map that we did present in draft form. So I just need to wrap that up. And I think that I don't know if you spoke about this before, but Dana's going to also finalize her second report, and I'll check with her to make sure that's on schedule.
Yep, she said yesterday it'll be done. She aims for the end of the week. Hopefully it'll be done by then. So that's great. Chuck, we have you next with 2 bullet items here. Do you want to take both of those?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to get into it. I can be pretty long-winded, so I'll try not to do that. But I guess just to kind of put an explanation point on your last point, Steve. If you want to put up my red map, that's the one that I shop around wherever I go places. And so, it is pretty sobering, I will say. But sorry, I actually forgot my computer at the office, so I'm on my cell phone, so I can't share my screen or make my video any better.
I'll stick it up here then.
And this is kind of off the cuff, but just to so people understand, we did the red map was a PDF attachment, Steve, but just so people understand, like we're doing roughly, since me and Nate have been in town, about $1 million in capital on the distribution system alone. And that would be, last year we did School Street, which was a little bit bigger job. So that was actually more than $1 million. So that's the kind of level of work that $1 million will get you. We did $1 million when we did the Magnolia, Ocean Street, Raymond Street jobs a few years ago. The Boardman Harbor Street job that we did, that was about $1 million, although that was kind of a specialty lining. And all of those add up to, about $1 million. $1 million gets you about a mile of pipe, give or take. And like I said, there's extenuating circumstances for all of these things. But so that's generally what we're talking about. And you can see that, so that map, everything in red is unlined cast iron pipe. And that was built, installed before 1900. So it's made it about 130 years, give or take, which is exceptionally good, even with the amount of iron and manganese we have in those pipes today. Getting 130 years is very good. So what I say to the FinCom and the select board and anybody else that sees this map is, it had a good run, but anything we can do to accelerate that work is money well spent. And Nate and I try and, adjust where we go based on, if there's sewer work that needs to be done or drainage work that needs to be done, which actually turns out is pretty much everywhere in town. So, there's no shortage of projects. It keeps us busy. So I guess that's where I'll leave it at that. And then I guess jumping into kind of the next thing that we talked about was the meter stuff. So as I told Steve, in a former life, I did do quite a few meter jobs. Well, I wouldn't say quite a few, but I did a couple big meter jobs, and then I did a lot of little meter jobs. And so the short story there is every meter vendor that's out there would love to sell us 2,200 meters or however many accounts we have, and they would love to especially a couple of them would really love to give you guys a presentation to tell you why their meter and their AMI software is the best AMI software that has ever existed. I would say the meters are they do it a little bit different way, but in general, most of the meters read, and they read well and at low flows and all of those types of things. But where they really can differentiate themselves is how user friendly they are when it comes to things like the ability to have an app, or even if you're a desktop person, they'll have a login and have all that, and they even get sophisticated enough where they will send you an email or shoot you a message and say you're using a lot of water today, you might want to check and make sure your hose isn't running, or you have a leak, or all of those types of things are kind of on the table. But not all of the meter vendors, because they're typically not software engineers, they're not as user friendly, or they that's where you pay when you do these kind of projects, is to make them nicer, make the interface nicer. And then pretty much all of them will allow us to tweak they just send us a data file, and we take that data file and turn it into quarterly bills or monthly bills. So that process isn't that big of a deal. The other thing that's kind of a little bit of a can change from vendor to vendor is the way they collect the readings off the meters. So typically what we have now is a census meter that has what they call an MXU, and then we drive a truck with a laptop in it that picks up the reading off that MXU, and then we take that data file back to the office and do that. Well, to do an AMI system is more of a fixed network, where that meter and that MXU is going to call out and basically tell Sue in the office where that reading's coming from and all those types of things. And so that can happen over cell, or it can happen over a collection system, data collectors across the town. They have different radio frequencies, and so some of those things, depending on how proprietary it is, can cost more or cost less. And so that's kind of another thing to do. So I guess that's the basics. But then in general, one of the vendors especially would love to let anybody in town take it for a test drive, and basically either give us the meter or give us the software or give us a login. In the case where we're doing, say, a dozen of these, they might have me buy some of the meters, but that's something that we buy meters every year anyway. So we kind of have a set budget for that, or we can probably buy a dozen meters at $100 or a couple $100 a meter and an MXU, and let somebody take it. The hard part is getting into somebody's house to say, hey, we want to try this new meter, try this new AMI technology. And so I think that's where this task force can come in, is if there's 12 people, or 12 people have friends, 4 or 5 people have friends in a neighborhood or something like that, and would like to kind of volunteer for that. I think we could probably, kind of pull that off in the next couple months, because I think, talking to Steve and, others on, some of the subcommittees, I think that, our meters are kind of getting long in the tooth. We certainly would like to upgrade to an AMR system, but we're probably not going to do that this year. It's not in my FY24 budget. So we would be looking at an FY25 budget, which is, about a year from July. So, we could get, 6 to 12 months worth of data before we make a big decision. And
It's
so
an
I think
appealing-
that's
it's a-
the,
It's a great, I think it's a very appealing suggestion. I'm curious what other people think, but it's also potentially a way we could get some engagement and interest from people not on the task force. Say, 6 of us volunteered to put these meters in our houses, and we invited 6 other people, not on the citizens, not on the task force, to volunteer similarly and try to get, in fact, a spectrum of users. Maybe we could get one of these top 10 folks who's curious to participate. What do you think? John?
Yeah, yes, I'm all for it. I've got a couple of questions for Chuck, one on each of the topics that he just spoke about. And the first one, well, the most recent topic there was meters. Chuck, all of these companies, and I guess you know them, have you worked with several of these guys that have approached you, or you've approached them and said we might be interested? Or these new guys or what?
yeah, no, so they stop in the office. I have a
Oh,
cubby full of notepads from all of them asking me, just blank notepads that say Styles Company or Neptune Company or all of those. And so they just literally they're doing their route. Them, say, I think Neptune's in Gloucester. So on their way to Gloucester, the salesperson will stop in Manchester and say, "Hey, you guys, got any headway on that meter program that you need to do?" And
okay.
I tell him not really, and he just gives me a pad of paper and a couple pens.
Okay. Have you worked with any of these guys, particularly because you said you've put in several different systems? Okay. So you got
so
experience, and you know what you like and don't like, or who's done a real good job and who hasn't. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm all for the pilot program, no question about that. I want to go back to the map. The whole map is red.
Yeah.
How long, based upon the current pace, which is what, $1 million a year? And I think we're throwing maybe 1.5 or 2 next year or so, but that's an exceptional year, this coming year. How long is it going to take you at the current pace to replace all of this pipe? And this is all what, pre-1900? Yes.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's a tough question because things always come up. We haven't even got to PFAS yet, but
No.
At our current rate and, judging by supply chain issues now and inflation now, we're talking best case scenario, 25 years and probably more like 40.
Well, that's a lot of complaints between now and 25 years with problems with these pipes that are going to be, we've got a story for money just with the pipes and the meters and PFAS.
Yeah.
Well
There is
put.
no question in my mind.
Peter, your hand is up.
Yes, I've been kind of looking for volunteers and for the meters. And the question comes, if for whatever reason they decide not to go ahead with that particular meter or at all, they're assuming that you're going to replace the meter with whatever else.
You get free water for life, Peter.
Free water for life. Well, that could be a short, in my case, that could be a very short deal. But anyway, they're assuming that you'll just replace the meter if you're not going to go ahead with that company. That's
yeah.
correct.
I mean, if things fall through, then we would just we'll have their old meter really if we wanted, but we will we buy, like I said, we buy probably maybe not a couple hundred, but we buy probably close to 100 a year anyway, just for people building new houses and just to have a couple on the shelf in case that they always break. Not a huge amount, but around 100 a year probably.
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be a replacement of some sort if they decided not to go ahead, but I didn't want to make a definitive statement without talking.
Yeah, eventually, and either we do the program and 100% of the meters get replaced, or we don't do the program and we do what we've been doing, which is we have 100 on hand every year, and we would go back to these dozen or so houses and either put in the old meter or put in a new meter of the same make and model that we have now.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Gordon?
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, Chuck, these are the meters that physically are in the piping and not just the transmitter thing that goes outside. So it's a
Correct.
replacement of both of those.
So it's like it's a double. Is every vendor reps a certain kind of meter, And
Yeah.
that meter has a certain kind of MXU or
Right,
whatever AMI technology
So it's a pair
associated with
of
it.
things that go with it. And then
Yep.
if you do a program like this, are you guys the ones who are doing the plumbing, or is the vendor doing it, or is the homeowner who's coordinating all that?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of the homework we have to do, but typically the laying length from vendor to vendor on the meters is the same. So if you have a 1-inch meter and right now we have census, but if we want to put in a Badger meter, it's the same. And so our guys can do that.
Okay,
If we get into a much bigger upgrade project, it's not going to be our guys. It's going to be, a contractor that's, installing these, basically going door to door, making appointments, stuff like that. So it's a little bit different animal. So, if we're just, if we're doing a dozen, it'll probably be our guys. The vendor will probably want to be there just to make sure things go smoothly, especially if they're trying to sell us, 2,400, 2,200 meters.
okay.
They'll be around.
Folks in Belmont did about 7,000 new meters 5 years ago. And they did it over 3 years. So they did it at about the pace that Chuck's talking about. We could do ours in a year. And the duration was 30 to 60 minutes per house. And I don't know, there may have been some outside preparation, some hanging of, connector transponder kinds of things on light poles and stuff, but the actual interruption to get inside the house and make some changes was small.
Yeah, it's pretty much just a pretty quick swap unless there's extenuating circumstances, which there always are, but not. You're hoping for about 10% of extenuating circumstances, and the other 90% are kind of plug and play.
And Chuck, is the technology of the sensor itself changed? Is it acoustic more than mechanical, or is that?
So like I said, a lot of them do it different. They all do it differently. So the kind of generic, 5/8 meter is usually positive displacement, but there's, single jets, there's turbines, there's ultrasonic, there's all sorts of different things that they do. So,
Okay.
That's something that we will qualify in an RFP process where we'll say, tell us how you do it and why it's so good. And then we read their, literature and proposal and interview and say, okay, we agree with that or we don't. And
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you won't have any trouble enlisting a couple, 3 of them to come and give us a 45-minute spiel. And
No.
maybe that'll help.
I told them to keep it
process.
under half an hour because they can be pretty long-winded too.
Okay, perfect. And we'll just send out some dates, and anybody who's interested in that can join in. Scott.
Yeah.
I think John had his hand up first.
Okay.
Nope,
I think it's down.
I made my
Okay.
comments, Scott. You're
It's
on.
down.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
okay.
Scott.
So I guess I question, Chuck, on the water main replacement, would I be correct in assuming this would also help with unaccounted for water and leaks?
Yeah. So on that front, where we started was the ones that we knew were bad. So that
Yeah.
was the Boardman. I mean, some of this pipe, I can't believe it was actually, still pipe. Like when we turned off Boardman Avenue to do that lining work, the pipe literally disintegrated in the ground. Like it was just, sheer static pressure, hydrostatic pressure that was keeping it going. We also, this is the story. We replaced Boardman Ave, which is right on the ocean. We replaced Ocean Street, which is right on the ocean. We replaced Raymond Street, which is right on the ocean. So those were, the Swiss cheese cast iron pipe, where we, and obviously we have break history and stuff like that. So that we got the low lying fruit. Now we're getting to, not quite getting the same return in terms of unaccounted for and leaks, but I suspect that we will find some that we didn't know existed as we keep going.
Yeah, that was the second part of my question. Can you target areas and get them first where the biggest leaks are? And it sounds like you are doing that. So I think you're at 25% unaccounted for water. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the most recent ASR.
That's
I haven't done the ASR for this year yet. I suspect we will see some fairly decent progress, although the big wild card is when we did School Street. I don't know if any of the people on this task force live on School Street or were part of that project, but when you hooked up to the bypass, you actually bypass the meter. And so typically those people didn't get bills. So that's also something we have to estimate, but It's kind of hard to put a real number on.
Fair enough. And
Looking at this map, I mean, how much of the red is no longer red?
good question.
About 4 or 5 miles. So the ones
Okay,
I just
so-
mentioned, basically, it does need to be updated. I actually did have it updated. I just couldn't find it. But yeah,
Okay,
about 4 or
thanks.
5 miles.
So Summer and Boardman and
Boardman,
Well, summer actually is still red. It's Ocean Street.
I
Raymond
mean,
Street.
school, I meant
and-
school, sorry.
Yep,
Yep.
School Street. Yep,
And
that's
Raymond. Yep.
that's now renewed. Yep.
It'd be fun to see the new map. Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't have quite the impact.
This one's a lot more dramatic, but yeah, thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
lying to it.
Never let the truth get in the
honestly-
way of a good story, right? Yeah.
It's going to look a lot less red because we have done a lot of work, but it's actually kind of laughable. It's like, wow, that really didn't add up the way I thought.
Yeah. Ron,
I
oh, sorry, Ann, go ahead.
let me just, I think it'd be a really good story for the town to see how much we're actually doing.
Yeah, I do have it. I just, like I said, I couldn't put my hand on it.
So you said, just as a rule of thumb, Chuck, that a 50-year replacement cycle would probably be in order for current infrastructure. So
Yeah, I mean, typically you're looking at 2% a year. Is that's just a
yeah,
rule.
so
of thumb.
if this was up to snuff, none of it would be pre-1900, but the color range you see in the lower left, there'd be a pretty equitable mixture of stuff going back to like 1970.
Yep.
In other words, the oldest pipe in the system should not exceed 50 years if you're on a 50-year replacement cycle.
Yeah, that'd be something.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're not
so
there.
that's the contrast. No matter how good it looks once we get the updated one, the question is, why is there any red, and how long is it going to take to fix it? Okay, Ron.
Yeah, just a quick question. The planning board is considering a proposal from cell signaling up on the end of School Street. Just wondering if that would turn red if they go ahead with their proposal with water supply. Additionally, there's the 40A and just wondering if that would turn red.
40B.
Yeah. So
40B, right, sorry.
Yep. So I have been talking to the CST folks, and they would, I zoomed in on the map. I don't know if you can do it, Steve, but so basically they're looking to extend the main on Forest Street. So we've actually, so right at the intersection of Summer and Forest, we actually have replaced that. So that stub is no longer red. That
Okay.
brown color that you're looking at on Forest Street is actually,
Yeah.
it's not that much better. It's 1900 to 1909. So, an extra decade there. But so they would replace all of that. So that's a win. And then they actually would go down Mill Street. And the story there is Mill Street's actually one of the newer pipes in town. Probably some of you remember when Mill Street was taken over by the town, and they actually installed a water main at that time. So that's only a couple decades old now, but it's undersized for what they're looking for. So it would actually, that purple pipe on Mill Street would be, a new 12-inch instead of, I believe it's an 8-inch right now. So that's not, a huge boon to the distribution system, but getting rid of the brown on Forest Street will definitely be a boon, and it'll be a much nicer loop. And then if the 40B does go forward, they will have to finish the loop from School Street, from Atwater Ave down. That would get the red that's connecting School Street and Mill Street. They would have to bring that all the way down to where we ended this past year's job, which is basically at the county club. So that that section of red would be removed if that goes forward.
And new main would be moved up here under 128 to their site.
Yep, that would be the plan.
Good questions. Jeff?
Another bonus, I think, of getting rid of replacing pipe is less iron and manganese and less need for flushing.
Good points.
Yep.
And increased pressure, greater efficiency of the system.
For sure.
Exactly. I'd like to switch gears here, but I don't want to cut anybody off. So any final questions or comments about meters or distribution infrastructure? So I want to turn the spotlight over to water quality and contaminants, the work that Gordon and Jess and their team are doing, along with some kind of update on the state of play with regulation of PFAS. So Gordon, you want to kick that off, and perhaps other people can chime in.
Sure. I don't have much to comment on the PFAS. I know there were some emails last week, but I wasn't able to keep up with all of it. I don't know, does anybody want to address the new PFAS standards or anything like that before we get into our
Well,
subject
Chuck, you
for-
had a particularly practical, useful prediction. You want to share that with the task force?
Sure. I think you're referring to as we all know, the state regulates 6 contaminants at 20 parts per trillion total. EPA is definitely going to come out with new regs. We're expecting them in March. From what I heard, they're going to regulate down to 10 parts per trillion, but only for 2. Those 2 are PFOS and PFOA, which are the most prevalent, and they're also the most treatable, or from my novice understanding. And then that will, for us, mean that Lincoln Street well, which the PFOS and PFOA are 2 of the 6 that we have numbers for, and when we report to the state for the 6 at 20, and we are above 10, so we will be to a point where we will need to come into compliance with those regs, which my read is 2 years. I don't know if that means that we have 2 years to install treatment, or 2 years to have a plan to install treatment, or we have to shut it off for the next 2 years. I don't know that level, but that's generally what the rumors are around town. And then for Gravelly Pond, we do test for those 2 as well as part of our testing, and we are under 10 for those 2, but we're at 7, so we're not that far off. And I would say, depending on how quickly the labs get up to snuff, I could see that number going down at some point, but that's way out in the distance. Right now, I think we can pretty much bank on 10 parts per trillion.
Right. So for those of you who haven't been following the back and forth of the rumors about the EPA, they're clearly wrestling with some tension between the health advisories, which came out last summer, which are set at almost 0, parts per quadrillion they were advising. And that's not drinking water per se, that's just exposure for human beings, and it's an advisory. But they're also, on the other side, they're wrestling with the fact that you can't measure those very, very tiny titrations. It's too precise. And as Chuck said, a compromise is going to be in the area of 5 or 10, which is about the resolution of the current tests. There are tests on the market that can resolve, at a fraction of a part per trillion, but they're not in widespread use. Randy.
Yeah, this is, I guess, sort of a question for Chuck and the group. What about blending the 2 sources? Have you, looked into that, or if the levels do come down lower?
Yeah. So I don't know, Steve, if that was going to be part of our discussion later tonight, but yeah, we actually did have a pretty long conversation about that as well. And I think that we definitely could do that, or at least that so far when they started regulating these things, I think that was something they were encouraging was, areas where you had multiple wells and maybe one was bad and one wasn't so bad, as long as your point of entry into the distribution system is under the limit, then you are okay. So we would fall into that category, I believe, and I need to do a little bit more homework on that. But I think an alternative to installing treatment at Lincoln Street Well would be to pipe Lincoln Street Well all the way to Gravelly Pond and then treat well, at first, I think we would be blending and we would be under the 10 part per trillion threshold as well. Although that's the part I have to do homework on. But then beyond that, we could install pretty robust treatment at the treatment plant, that doesn't have some of the confines of being on Lincoln Street. And we could potentially, solve the problem that way. I think that's a more long-term solution, but definitely something we're going to look more into. I have a call on Friday to do a little more homework on that.
Great. Yeah, I'll just follow up very briefly on that. Brainstorms can be totally wacko crazy things, but I woke up this morning thinking, wait a minute, we have to replace the water mains on Pleasant and on much of Pine Street. Why don't we get a twofer? Dig those up and replace them at the same time, lay a pipe that flows the other direction to take Lincoln Street's output up to a consolidated treatment facility. And then we would be able to be blending, because as Chuck said, to benefit from blending, it has to be actual physical blending. You can't just kind of average your two sources and say, on average, our water's clean. But obviously it's not a cheap thing, and nobody knows. Chuck, you probably have the best estimate, but nobody knows exactly, is this a $5 million project or a $25 million project? So one of the things we may be recommending here is that that's an option worth some engineering examination, so we get a number such as we have for the option of a new treatment facility at the Lincoln Street well. Scott?
Yeah, Chuck, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned 7 is the number at Gravelly Pond. What about the Round Pond well? Do we have enough data there to have a fix on what those numbers are looking like?
So that roughly, I'm doing this off of memory, but it's around 3. It's less than Gravelly Pond. So it's not, it's definitely has some amount, but not what we're seeing in Gravelly Pond, which again is, less than what we're seeing at Lincoln Street. So yeah, it's kind of no rhyme or reason, but we do have some numbers.
Yeah, I'm just looking for those, but I'm not going to find them quickly. Well, that was a nice short detour on PFAS, Gordon.
That's great.
Can I hand the mic back to you to talk
Sure
more
thing.
generally about maintaining water quality? And
Yeah, Randy, did you have another question, or are you all set from your hand?
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Steve, can I share my screen? Can you enable that? Or okay.
I'll make sure you can. Let me stop first, and then don't tell me about low system resources. Yep, you're good to go.
All right, thanks. So sub-team 4 had sent out to everybody after last meeting sort of our draft document of the work we've done and recommendations and things like that. And we were hoping to get some feedback tonight if we could from folks, if you've read it, if you have any thoughts on it. I can walk you through briefly the highlights and then leave some time for discussion. So I think most of this we presented, along the way over the year. In the beginning, we have some introduction to the supply system and just sort of orienting people with maps, and we try to include maps throughout so that people know what we're talking about. And then we highlight the issues that we've talked about this year, which are the rising sodium levels. And I apologize, I know Chuck has some more finely sampled things this year, which are a little lower, so I need to update this figure, but sodium is still high. And we have an updated map of the PFAS levels at Lincoln Street and Gravelly Pond. And I don't know if this trend is going to continue, but it does seem like maybe things are trending down a little bit. Chuck, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I do appreciate that we're still above probably 10 for those 2 components that you mentioned a second ago. This is the full.
Yeah, they've trended. Yeah, they've been trending still above 10, even though they've been trending down. And I don't know if we can really assign that to anything.
Right.
Yeah, this is just an eyeball, Gordon, but isn't it just one of the split samples that's trending, the other is stable?
Yeah, that may be fair. Yep.
Okay,
may be fair.
and that, in those kind of cases, you never really know whether it's a measurement phenomenon or an artifact or reality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I mean, not much to make of that for those reasons, except to say that we're still high and we're probably above these new limits as they come out. So those were sort of the main changes since the 1990 report, the sodium and the PFAS, and then we spent some time going through potential sources of these and other contaminants, and so we broke that out into the different types of things that we've talked about and investigated. One being roadway runoff, and just to draw your attention to this, I know Chuck was going to confirm this for me because it may not be still the case, but within this sensitive zone 1 of the Lincoln Street wellhead, we had like 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 roadway outflows into that region, and I don't know if this is still accurate and up to date, but it does seem like that's something we could consider redirecting to downstream or something like that, if that's still the case, and if people think that that's a useful thing to do. So that was roadway runoff. We looked at the EPA's hazardous waste sites within town. There's only a few that are still open, and then we also highlight obviously the former landfills, and we spent some time talking about the artificial turf playing fields. This has been, permitted to go forward by the Concom, and hopefully the new material that will be put down will be PFAS free. But I think we should try to verify that as it gets put down and make sure there's no sudden spikes or anything as a result of the work. We also tried reaching out to the fire department, the chief, around firefighting foam. It appears that even though there are alternatives, it really hasn't been aggressively pursued by the town. We still seem to have some of the old foam. And so you'll see in the recommendations later that we do encourage the town to take advantage of this foam buyback program that the state is running. So we talk about that, and that might have to be some instructions from the town if that's what we want to do. And then we did also look at underground storage tanks in town. There were a few of them. According to the state website, the Essex County Club tanks have all been removed. And you've heard me and us raise concerns in the past about this gas station that sits on Summer Street right up from the well. I was encouraged that over the years they've had a lot of different tanks, but according to the state documentation, the 2 tanks they have now are double lined, and they have active monitoring systems in place for leaks. So they should be notified quickly if there's any problems with those. So I was pleased to read about that, and that's included in here as well. We have some notes from Scott Horsley's assessment that saltwater inundation is not likely a source, and we have pulled together the testing information from the compost facility Black Earth, showing that that's not likely a source in town currently. So that's all sort of potential sources that we explored, and just we have information there about that. In terms of remediation options, we didn't spend a lot of time on these. I think we'll leave this to the experts, but we have some evidence from the medical building in town that switching to sodium-free ice melt alternatives on the roads really helped them drive down their salt quickly. But we don't really know if that's what's driving our current levels or not. You'll hear a lot more about the PFAS methods, and then we've been talking a lot about the landfill and understanding how much those might be contributing to Gravelly Pond. And so the main things that we would love, we're open to feedback on any of this, of course, but the main things we would love are your thoughts on our recommendations, because I think ultimately these recommendations shouldn't just be from the sub team. They should probably come from the full team and then go to the select board or whoever we deem appropriate for that. And we broke these out sort of by most urgent, and those that are timely we should address, and then those that are less urgent but still important. We're happy to take feedback on that organization as well as the suggestions. Under the most urgent category, we do feel like the development up in the Gravelly Pond area of Hamilton and the road paving are important issues that the town should be addressing, as well as the newly proposed developments. This is a recommendation to try to formalize monitoring this Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act alerts that come out for these neighboring towns. We don't, we assume that if there's a development proposed within town, the town is going to get notified, but we don't believe we're getting notified by default for the neighboring towns. And it feels like something that we should recommend the town formalize, maybe a role within the town government or something like that to be monitoring this. And certainly anyone can volunteer to monitor that as well, but it seems important enough that we should probably have somebody paid to do that. For timely recommendations, there is the new development up in the cell signaling area that probably we should be cognizant of given its situation with respect to the water supply. And then other less urgent but essential things that we recommended, again, exploring conservation restrictions up in the Gordon College area, looking at development within zone 2 of the Lincoln Street well, and extension of the aquifer protection districts, and then this issue that cropped up this year about water importation into the county club, which is very close to our wellhead protection area, and things like considering regulations on compost facilities that are local if we deem the state regulations to be insufficient given the issues that occurred in Westminster, Mass, and things like that we've talked about. Firefighting foam, requiring disposal of the PFAS containing foam through the state buyback program and banning future use. And then recommended continued monitoring of these and other contaminants just to see if there's trends occurring. So that was the bulk of it. We have appendices of all the things that we reference here. There's right now a Google Drive that we can share with you with all of these files, and we could put these on whatever site the town wants later to make them available to everyone.
Well, this is a bang up piece of work. Thank you. Thank all of that team for pulling
The whole
this together.
team. Yeah, thank you.
One quick update about development, particularly the Hamilton, as you know, submitted a plan to pave Tobacco Road where it is currently gravel up to our town line, which would be just past the where the driveway into our water treatment plant comes off Tobacco. And their local conservation commission approved that plan. There are a bunch of complications, but it was appealed by a significant group of neighbors and citizens in Hamilton who didn't want to see this become a heavily traveled thoroughfare or a high-speed route. And it appears that Hamilton judged that the DEP was likely to overturn the Concom because they have, as of last week, revised their plans for Tobacco Road and submitted a new DEP supplemental submission that would pave it except for the section that's closest to Gravelly Pond. It's kind of up on the top of the hill, about 60 feet from the bank of Gravelly Pond at high water. And that would remain gravel, although they're planning to reconstruct it essentially and install their stormwater management systems around it. So I haven't had a chance to look at that carefully, but it's a mixed message. Obviously, they still want this to be a more reliable year-round travel route, and that bodes poorly for protecting the reservoir and the wells.
Yeah.
Chuck?
Yeah, I didn't have much to say on that one. I was just gonna offer a couple comments on
Please do.
Gordon's paper, but and the whole sub team. But so I do owe you I did get the plans from the school and I had them get scanned. But it does appear that those outfalls that are shown on the GIS do actually still outfall where they're shown.
Yeah.
So I think we will have to consider that a little bit deeper and change those. I don't know if that's going to change where you put it on your priorities list there, most urgent, but I do think there's definitely an opportunity to, bring all those outfalls down to the lower outfalls kind of downstream of the well.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that might be, even though the school says they, use sodium-free salt now,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's always been the case. And I think these outfalls now make me wonder more about, if that's where the spike initially came from after they did the reconstruction of the school itself. And it is picking up, road salt from higher up in the system where we would, be responsible. So it's something
I was surprised. I was surprised by
talk
that.
to Mike. Yeah.
I was surprised by that. I didn't realize it reached all the way up here to School Street and everything. So that's an interesting possibility as well. Yeah.
Yep. And so so that's most of what I have to say.
Great.
I guess I'm wondering, did the idea of stuff coming down from 128 through Sawmill Brook that way, was that something that you guys gave a lot of thought? Or
we had talked about that as well, right? So you see this somewhere. We had a lot of versions of the same graph, basically at different zoom levels. I'll try to find it for you real quick. Yeah. But you're right. Yeah, I think
Certainly talked
upper
about
side.
it a lot.
Yeah. Here it is. Here.
There it
So
is.
we tried to highlight with some circles and stuff. There's a bunch of outflows up here on Atwater Ave into Sawmill Brook, as well as along the highway that could potentially be just sort of bringing more sodium in. And that's sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Nope. That I was just agreeing that we had talked about that. So you found it there.
And I think you can petition the state and apply for, low salt zones.
Sodium zones.
But you need more data, I think, like a year's worth of regular sampling and stuff like that.
The stream team had looked into probably 10 or 15 years ago, trying to get even the section of 127 that would drain down Lincoln Street toward the well to be low salt. And we just found it was a bigger process than at least we were able to take on at that point. But
Well put.
Peter? Yeah, go ahead.
Gordon?
Yes.
I know the state has a program down the Cape on nitrogen from old septic systems and fertilizers in environmentally sensitive areas. Is this something, and it's a long way before it gets up to us, but is this something that we should be looking at, changing our Title V regulations or something to look at this nitrogen in our area?
Trying to think if nitrogen is in the set of things that we've looked at. But Chuck, you might know if it's part of the stuff you're regularly monitoring or not. I can look and see.
But also most of the homes within the area of the well are going to be on septic, not
septic.
on sewer. Sorry, sewer, not septic.
Yeah, not septic.
I'll just jump in. Gordon, I did look at the nitrogen levels, and Chuck, please correct me, but they're pretty low. I don't think it's, and I looked at that early on, and again, as Jessica just said, most of the contributing areas on sewer and the levels are low. So I think this is probably a lower priority issue for Manchester, given other things you're looking at. Since if I may, Steve, while I got the floor here, my only other comment was going to be on the stormwater. In addition to sodium reduction, you're going to get a lot of other water quality benefits. There's if we were all to pick our top 10 scariest contaminants, they're all in stormwater. It's just amazing. Pesticides, probably PFAS, by the way.
Yeah.
Just a lot of, so the benefits of what you're talking about really are pretty significant and go beyond the sodium.
Yeah, it's still not great news for Sawmill Brook further down, but it could help the drinking water to move that a little further south.
Yeah, that's next year's problem, right, Gordon?
Yeah.
Ron, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any reconsideration, I don't know to who, about the Hamilton's proposal of moving the road away from our drinking well supply. I know it was defeated at town meeting, but I was wondering if we have some kind of reason, our recommendations on moving that away from our water supply, if that can be reconsidered.
I think it came up and briefly had a second life, but then faded away. And this is 6 months ago, if I remember correctly, with the select board. In any event, it's not in their current supplemental submission to DEP. I think my suspicion is it simply adds another complication and another year or two of time waiting for state approval of a shift in a CR is it's a heavy lift, apparently.
And I think, Ron, to your point, we've kept our recommendations a little generic in this regard. Like, we haven't got into specifics about you should try to move the road again or whatever. But we did just try to highlight that, that whole issue of development in that area and relations with the neighboring towns is really important, and we need to be making progress on improving those relationships and trying to protect that area.
Yeah, it is actually another reason to support putting in some monitoring wells if that road becomes significantly more heavily traveled.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And, and we're happy to, strengthen these recommendations if the full team wants to go that direction. We didn't get into specifics about you should put in monitoring wells or whatever. We just sort of said at this point, we feel like more study is needed, and that could include those monitoring wells. But
yeah, I think that's a good idea. My own concept of this is that we'll take these findings as gospel and the recommendations as advisory as we try to mold together a full set of recs.
That would be great. That would be great. I think that's how we'd like that to be used as well, right? So the committee will sort of work on some recommendations, and we can leave it at this for the sub team. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of this is kind of pushing a string. You'd like to get conservation restrictions of some kind on the Gordon College property, but
right,
we don't have any particular leverage or budget for doing that with Gordon.
Yeah.
Okay, other comments or questions about this?
I just want to say too, if people hadn't had a chance to review it, and obviously we continue to be open to, to comments and suggestions.
Yeah, that's a great point. Please reach out to any of us, and we'll try to incorporate your comments.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that the CREATE report that was basically done last summer is still not yet in final form, as I understand it, although Sue Croft may have an update for us on that. And I just want to be careful to make sure that we're not conflicting with it.
Is there a draft or something that we can take a look at?
I believe there is, but in most cases, it's really an exercise in scenario building, meaning for instance, there's no finding that there's X percentage risk in the next 10 years of saltwater infiltration in the Lincoln Street well. There's just a what if exercise, assuming that it's going to happen sometime in the next 10, 20, 40 years.
So my only addition to what you're saying, Steve, is that yes, there is a draft. I could probably share it with this group. we just haven't been able to get it finalized with the group that we've been working with. And also need to sit down with, Greg and the select board to say, how do we want to move forward with the information that we have? But I can definitely share it with everybody here who's interested. And I think I already have shared it with a few people. The only other thing to keep in mind is it's strictly, very strictly coastal resilience, like focused. We're not talking about PFAS. We're not talking about any of that kind of stuff. It's legitimately just focused on coastal resilience. So when we're talking about contaminants in this particular report for CREATE, we're talking about like saltwater intrusion based on sea level rise, that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit of a different flavor than everything we're trying to capture, but definitely there's some overlap. So yeah, I can share that.
But coastal resilience was last year's project, wasn't it? And this year's project is the effect of climate change on water, drinking water resources, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was more looking at I think coastal resilience it was also the hotter, drier, flash drought, flash rain, those types of scenarios. So the impacts that those types of things will have on our water supply is kind of where it met the coastal resiliency part of it. Sue's being very nice. Me and Nate just haven't given our blessing yet, I think is what we're all waiting for. So we did have a good follow-up meeting with them with the comments on our draft and making it more digestible. And I haven't been able to find the time to talk about or just make sure they incorporated the comments that they said they were going to, which I'm sure they did, but I should click through it.
Well, Chuck, you should stop spending your evenings in meetings.
Someday.
Yeah.
I
also
wonder,
want to.
go ahead.
I was just gonna make a joke. I also, because I love night meetings so much, I am trying to get on the Wenham Water Commission. And also when I did that, I was going around to get signatures and somebody's like, oh, did you hear about the 300 unit development that's going in that Gordon just sold right next to your water supply in Manchester? And I was like, wow, there we go. Another one. So I don't know how real that project is, but yeah, there's certainly more development abound.
Wow.
You were talking about Gordon College?
That's what I was told by somebody that's actually running for the select board over here. But it seems like it's in the very infancy stages, but yeah. And it's right, it would be, right next to Travely Pond.
Yeah, there've been white paper things over the last couple of years, but I wasn't aware of an actual plan or RFP or anything like that. Let's go find that out. Well, good luck. And if you need our help campaigning, some people on task force are great going door to door.
Just one point about saltwater inundation. I guess we noted in here that Scott Horsley's assessment was that probably not a contributor right now to the Lincoln Street well, but I guess I'm wondering, should we capture anywhere in the work of either the full committee or the sub team that if that becomes a problem along the coast where some people may be on wells, we may be looking or needing to add more customers to the water system. I guess that should be noted at some point. Because I would assume, Scott, your assessment was deep inland based on the topology around Lincoln Street well and stuff, but there could certainly be private wells closer to the water that could be impacted by that.
Yeah, and it could also limit the development of irrigation wells at some of those properties.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
they may not be viable because of that reason.
Yeah.
Negative feedback loop. Yep. Well put. Okay, good job on that. And by all means, take a peek and send praise and suggestions.
I guess if you send, make sure you copy me at least on it, and we'll make sure we get any of your comments to the full team.
To both Gordon and Jess is a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we also have the current draft findings and recommendations and the funding for next year. I don't have anything new to report about current draft findings. Although the conversation, I think it was over 2 hours with Chuck on Monday, was very helpful in focusing. I told him afterwards, I think it's taken, at least for me, about a year to get schooled enough in this all these complicated issues of politics and technology and economics and chemistry, just to be able to ask the right questions and understand what Chuck already knows. So you'll see some changes in that in the next few weeks, and I'll be seeking your reactions to it. I don't have any updates either on the funding that we recommended for fiscal year 24. But I wonder, John, is it fair to ask whether the select board is inclined one way or another, or have they discussed this yet?
It's the board has not discussed it yet, but it is fair to ask. And I would say I've had some informal discussions with Greg. I think we should be prepared to prioritize our recommendations. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
We're asking for what, 75?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it'll come up to that.
Okay. Well, we certainly won't be terribly surprised by that.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we can do some prioritization. All right. Our last items here are to review and vote on minutes from the last meeting. Are there any changes or additions from anyone? Hearing none, can I hear a motion to accept them?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Move a second.
Second,
Moved and seconded. All those in favor,
Aye.
please indicate with a hand. I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Good. Thank you. Anyone opposed? No. Excellent. It is unanimous. And following our custom, our next meeting date would be March 8th at 7 p.m. Does that pose any problem that anyone can see now?
March 8th.
I probably won't be able to attend, but don't let that stop you.
I think your record is unbroken up to this point, so you're entitled to a pass on one. Good. So we'll meet March 8th, 7 p.m. And there will likely be both some materials for you to look at if time permits between now and then. And also, I hope 1 or 2 meetings with these eager beaver meter vendors that Chuck can help us set up so we can get that ball rolling, because I think that's actually.
So is I can talk to him pretty quickly. Is the idea that I don't know that I would want to have both of them in the same meeting at the same time.
No, I don't think
but
we should have a bake off.
Do you want 2 of them or more, or you want to just do one? And
I don't know what other people's
want to do
experiences.
another.
You gain a lot, in my experience, by having at least 2 of these meetings with different vendors to compare.
Yeah. Do you want me to try and get them for that March 8th? Or is that whatever that date
No, I was
was?
suggesting we do those half hours separately and just let people sign up if they're interested.
Okay,
So,
so you want me to just get a time from the vendor and relay it to you, and you can let everybody
Yeah.
know, and we can make it on Zoom if that's easier for people.
Yep,
To
unless
call in.
anybody wants to handle the goods, that sort of thing. Sue, can you lend a hand with coordinating their time with what might make sense for the team?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So those are 2 things to keep your eyes peeled for. And Jeff.
I just wanted to make an observation that I think a lot of our first year of this has been spent. We originally thought a lot about conservation, and that led to looking at increased water rates. And it's kind of flipped on its head in a lot of ways. I think we need increased water rates to support 3 things in probably order of priority, in my opinion. Lincoln Street well, PFAS remediation. Number 2, replacing those red lines that cause a lot of problems that are from the 1800s. And, we need money for that. So we need to raise the rates. And number 3 is all the good things and efforts that are required for conservation that we also need to do, but that's just my observation.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to contribute to the meter cost either. Agree, disagree?
Agree.
Fine. Well, last call here. Any other items we should be talking about tonight that we haven't? Great, then we can hear the motion that everyone looks forward to.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Seconded?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any objection? Ron? Ron's voting in favor. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time and energy as always.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Night, everybody.
Night, everybody.
Good night, Chuck, Scott.